there's a photograph that haunts me. February 1952. A young woman in black descends from an airplane, her eyes heavy with grief. She's just become Queen Elizabeth II. But if you look closely at that image, something is missing. Something the world expected to see. Where are the diamonds, the pearls, the armor of monarchy that should shield a new sovereign from the weight of the crown? For 70 years, we watched her wear some of the most magnificent jewels ever created. The imperial state crown with its nearly 3,000 diamonds, the Vladimir tiara dripping with emeralds, Queen Mary's legendary pieces passed down through generations. We learned to read her brooches like a language, decoding her messages through sapphires and rubies. But here's what we missed. The moments when she chose to wear almost nothing at all. When she deliberately set aside the splendor and stood before the world in striking simplicity. Those weren't oversights. They were her most calculated, most powerful acts of communication. 8 times across her reign, at history's most pivotal turning points, Queen Elizabeth II understood something profound. That sometimes silence speaks louder than diamonds ever could, and most of us never even noticed. The Return Home, 1952. Let's start at the very beginning of her reign, with an image that would define everything that followed. February 7th, 1952. A young woman descends the steps of an aircraft at London Airport. She's dressed entirely in black, a simple mourning coat, no elaborate jewellery, no royal regalia. Just 25 years old, she had left Britain as Princess Elizabeth on a Commonwealth tour. She returns as Queen Elizabeth II. Her father, King George VI, had died suddenly in his sleep while she was staying at a treehouse hotel in Kenya. She literally became queen while sleeping, unaware that her world had changed forever. And now, the entire nation watches as she comes home to shoulder a burden she never expected to carry so soon. Here's where it gets interesting. Traditional royal protocol for such a moment would call for elaborate mourning diamonds. Think Queen Victoria's famous commemorative pieces, heavy with symbolism and authority. The new queen needed to project strength, continuity, the unbroken line of monarchy. But what did Elizabeth choose? Almost nothing. On her black coat, she wore a single brooch. 1. The Flame Lily brooch, a modest platinum and diamond piece shaped like the national flower of southern Rhodesia. It had been given to her by African schoolchildren during the 1947 royal tour, a gift from over 40,000 children who had contributed small sums toward its creation. Her father had been with her when she received it. Caroline de Guitaut, deputy surveyor of the Queen's Works of Art, later explained, "While the diamond, platinum and white gold setting is undoubtedly lovely, I imagine it was the sentiment behind it that drew her to it for such an occasion. Just one small, meaningful brooch that spoke of Commonwealth, of her father's memory, of duty over display." This was one of the only times in her entire 70-year reign that Queen Elizabeth appeared in public with virtually no jewellery. And that absence, it said everything. This wasn't a coronation. This wasn't a celebration. This was a monarch born in loss, a young woman choosing duty over spectacle, grief over grandeur. The photograph of her descending those steps became iconic, not despite its simplicity, but because of it. The South Africa tour. Now let's rewind 5 years earlier to when Princess Elizabeth was still learning the art of royal restraint. It's 1947. Britain is broken. World War II has ended, but the nation is still on strict rationing, food, clothing, everything. People are struggling, and the royal family is about to embark on a 3-month tour of South Africa. Traditionally, royal tours were spectacular displays of imperial wealth, tiaras at every banquet, diamonds dripping from every royal neck. But the young princess understood something crucial. Flaunting privilege while her people suffered would be disastrous. Throughout that tour, Princess Elizabeth wore simple pearls and discreet brooches. No tiaras during daytime events, no excessive diamonds. She dressed like someone who understood her people's struggles, not like someone above them. And here's the beautiful irony. During that very tour, she received one of the most spectacular gifts of her life: the South African diamonds, a magnificent 21-stone necklace presented for her 21st birthday. The largest diamond weighed 10 carats. It was breathtaking. But she didn't parade it around. She received it with what Sir Hugh Roberts described as unaffected exclamations of delight, genuine surprise and gratitude, not entitled expectation. The restraint she showed on that tour was a promise to her future subjects. I see you. I'm with you. This isn't about the jewels. It was a pre-ascension gesture that foreshadowed her entire reign. The Ghana visit. Fast forward to 1961, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Ghana had gained independence just 4 years earlier, one of the first African nations south of the Sahara to break free from colonial rule. President Kwame Nkrumah was flirting with socialism, developing concerning ties with the Soviet Union. The Cold War was at its peak. 5 days before the Queen's scheduled visit, bombs exploded in Accra. Winston Churchill wrote to Prime Minister Harold Macmillan expressing widespread uneasiness about the Queen's safety. Many urged her to cancel. She refused. "I think I'm being used," she reportedly told Macmillan, and she was absolutely right. This was about keeping Ghana in the Commonwealth and countering Soviet influence. But here's what made this visit brilliant. The Queen understood that arriving dripping in crown jewels, symbols of colonial extraction and imperial power, would destroy the entire mission. So she made a radical choice. For most of the visit, she wore minimal jewelry, lightweight earrings, simple necklaces, and at the State House ball, when cameras captured one of the most diplomatically significant images of her reign, the Queen dancing with President Nkrumah, the focus wasn't on her jewels. It was on the gesture itself. A white British monarch dancing with a black African president, demonstrating racial equality and Commonwealth unity. In 1961, while America was still facing segregation, this image sparked global headlines. The Queen's jewelry choices supported rather than dominated the diplomatic message. She wore enough to honor her hosts and respect ceremony, but restrained enough to avoid any suggestion of colonial condescension. The visit succeeded beyond expectations. Ghana remained in the Commonwealth. Soviet influence was cut off, and as Prime Minister Macmillan reportedly told President Kennedy, "I have risked my Queen. You must risk your money." The West Germany visit. 20 years after World War II ended, Queen Elizabeth II did something extraordinary. She became the first British sovereign to visit Germany since 1913, before both world wars. The emotional weight was immense. German cities had been rebuilt from rubble. British families still carried wartime scars. This wasn't a victory lap. This was about reconciliation and healing. Throughout this visit, the Queen wore notably restrained jewelry, discreet pearls and light brooches. At the state banquet in Bonn, she wore the Grand Duchess Vladimir tiara, and if you know the story behind this piece, you'll understand why it was brilliant. This wasn't a British crown jewel passed down through generations of conquering monarchs. This tiara had belonged to Grand Duchess Vladimir of Russia, a woman who fled the Bolshevik Revolution with nothing, whose jewels were smuggled out of St. Petersburg, hidden in the lining of a British diplomat's coat. It was a tiara born from loss, exile, and survival. By choosing this piece, the Queen wasn't speaking as a victor. She was speaking as a fellow European, acknowledging that both nations, Britain and Germany, had been scarred by war and revolution. The tiara's graceful, open design embodied dignity without dominance. Its Russian heritage made it neutral ground, a jewel that belonged to Europe's shared royal past, not to Britain's imperial conquests. Both Queen Elizabeth and President Heinrich Lübke expressed their conviction that the 20 years since the war have healed all enmity between our two countries. Her choice was itself a diplomatic apology, grace as diplomacy, restraint as respect. Even in her jewels, she was saying, "We are rebuilding together." The Ireland visit. And now we come to what might be the most emotionally sensitive trip of her entire reign. May 2011. Queen Elizabeth II becomes the first British monarch to visit the Republic of Ireland in a century, the first since Irish independence. Think about that history: centuries of British colonial rule, the devastating famine, the 1916 Easter Rising, the War of Independence, partition, and decades of troubles in Northern Ireland. The Queen had lost her beloved cousin, Lord Mountbatten, to IRA violence. Yet she accepted the invitation, knowing every word and gesture would be scrutinised. From the moment she descended from the aircraft, her choices conveyed careful diplomacy. She wore an emerald green coat and St. Patrick's blue dress, Ireland's colours. Throughout the 4-day visit, she wore minimal jewellery, modest brooches, including a specially commissioned shamrock motif, simple pearl earrings, and no tiaras or crown jewels. President Mary McAleese presented the Queen with a specially commissioned silver brooch featuring swirling designs inspired by the prehistoric triple spiral pattern at Newgrange, one of Ireland's most sacred sites. The Queen wore this gift immediately, a gesture of respect and appreciation. At the state banquet at Dublin Castle, the former seat of British rule, she delivered a speech that came pretty close to an apology, offering sincere thoughts and deep sympathy to all who had suffered. She even opened in Irish, "A Uachtaráin agus a Chaird, President and Friends." Her gown for the Dublin Castle state banquet was a masterwork of quiet symbolism. A white evening dress by Angela Kelly, its surface shimmering with 2091 hand-embroidered shamrocks, each one meticulously stitched in silver thread and crystal. The design honoured Ireland's emblem with grace and tact, while the Queen's choice of the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, a personal gift from her grandmother, added a subtle bridge of shared heritage. Together, the jewels and embroidery spoke a language of reconciliation and respect more eloquent than any display of crown diamonds. The visit included emotionally charged stops at Croke Park, where British forces killed 14 people in 1920, and the Garden of Remembrance, honouring Irish rebels who died fighting British rule. At each location, the Queen's simple, respectful attire reinforced her message of reconciliation. One Dublin resident tweeted, "A week ago I was a fiercely Republican royal skeptic. Now every time I see the Queen, she makes me smile." The absence of crown jewels and pomp was perhaps the loudest statement of all. It said, "I come in friendship, not as a ruler." The Annus Horribilis speech, November 24, 1992. The Queen stands at a Corporation of London luncheon marking her 40th year on the throne. She opens with stark honesty, "1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure." The year had been horrible. 3 of her 4 children's marriages were publicly collapsing. Windsor Castle had been severely damaged by fire just 4 days earlier. The monarchy faced unprecedented criticism. For this remarkably candid address, Queen Elizabeth wore a soft pastel outfit with one small brooch, no diamonds, no elaborate jewellery. This wasn't the armoured presentation of an invulnerable monarch. The soft colours and minimal jewellery suggested a woman acknowledging human fallibility, her family's and, by implication, her own. In moments of crisis, the traditional reflex of monarchy is to don the heaviest armour, the most formal jewels, to project unwavering stability. But the Queen reversed this expectation. By appearing without her usual protective layers of formal jewelry, she signaled that this was a personal moment, not just a ceremonial one. She was speaking as a woman who had experienced loss, disappointment, and public criticism, not as an infallible sovereign above human concerns. The speech and her appearance worked together to begin repairing the monarchy's damaged relationship with the British public. By showing humility and self-reflection, both verbally and visually, she demonstrated that the institution could adapt. The State Opening of Parliament, May 11th, 2021. The State Opening of Parliament, normally one of the most regal events in the British calendar. The monarch arrives in full ceremonial regalia, the imperial state crown, robes of state trimmed with ermine, the most splendid diamonds. But this occasion was profoundly different. It was the Queen's first major public engagement since the death of Prince Philip, her husband of 73 years, just 1 month earlier. The 95-year-old Queen appeared in a light lilac day dress and matching hat. No crown, no ceremonial robes, no significant jewelry except a small brooch. The imperial state crown was present, but sat on a cushion beside her rather than on her head. Most poignantly, there was only one throne. The space where Philip's chair would have sat remained empty. This was a radical visual break from centuries of tradition. Queen Elizabeth redefined majesty through minimalism, showing that her commitment to duty persisted even in profound grief. Royal commentator Alistair Bruce observed that despite Philip's absence, the Queen still felt the steadiness of his presence and encouragement after decades at her side. But she chose to honour that presence through restraint rather than spectacle, demonstrating strength, not frailty. The lilac dress, a soft, non-mourning colour, suggested healing and continuity. She was not wallowing in grief, but continuing to serve, even while bereaved. For viewers around the world, many of whom had lost loved ones during the pandemic and attended funerals alone due to restrictions, the Queen's solitary figure resonated deeply. She was showing that even monarchs must make sacrifices for the common good. That service to others continues even in personal sorrow. The Platinum Jubilee, and now we come to the final chapter, June 2nd, 2022. Queen Elizabeth II releases a photograph and message thanking the nation as Platinum Jubilee celebrations begin. The image shows the Queen looking serene and content at Windsor Castle. She wears a soft blue dress with a single aquamarine brooch pinned to her chest. No tiaras, no elaborate jewels. Just simple pearl earrings and that one meaningful brooch. The aquamarine brooch held deep significance. It was one of a pair of Art Deco brooches by Boucheron that her father, King George VI, had given her for her 18th birthday in 1944. She had worn these brooches throughout her entire reign, often at the most important moments. For her Platinum Jubilee, and what would prove to be among her final public images, she chose this deeply personal piece. The brooches represented her father's love, her long reign, and the continuity between the young princess who received them and the 96-year-old monarch who still treasured them. This photograph represents the last time Queen Elizabeth II consciously presented herself to the nation as their queen. And she did so with total restraint. The soft colours, minimal jewelry, and natural light created an image of peace and quiet satisfaction rather than triumphant spectacle. Her message emphasized service and gratitude. I continue to be inspired by the goodwill shown to me and hope that the coming days will provide an opportunity to reflect on all that has been achieved during the last 70 years. Just 3 months later, on September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle. The Platinum Jubilee photograph became, in retrospect, her visual farewell, a final demonstration that her reign had never been about the jewels, but about the woman who wore them and the duty she served. These 8 moments share something profound. Each occurred at a turning point in monarchy, politics, international relations, or the Queen's personal life. Each represented a conscious break from expected royal display. And in each case, silence and restraint communicated more effectively than spectacle ever could. Queen Elizabeth II demonstrated that true majesty does not depend on diamonds, tiaras, or ceremonial crowns. Her restraint, rare, deliberate, eloquent, became the purest expression of power, empathy, and grace. She understood that in the modern world, a monarch's power comes not from forcing others to acknowledge grandeur, but from earning respect through appropriate restraint. The most valuable royal jewels aren't always the largest diamonds or the most historic tiaras, but the pieces, or the deliberate absence of pieces, that tell the most compelling human stories. Whether grieving her father, reconciling with former enemies, or simply thanking her people after 7 decades of service, she demonstrated that the most majestic thing a monarch can do is to strip away the expected armor of jewels and appear simply as a human being committed to duty. That perhaps is the most valuable jewel of all, and the one that will ensure Queen Elizabeth II's legacy sparkles brightest in the historical record. It makes you wonder, in our own lives, when might silence speak louder than our words? When might restraint communicate more than display? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which of these moments resonates most with you? Let me know in the comments below.